Looking at the muscles of the pelvis, they are subdivided into three groups: extrapelvic, which are abdominal muscles, pelvic wall muscles, and the pelvic diaphragm or floor muscles. So we're going to review the extrapelvic muscles quickly. So extrapelvic muscles that run down into the pelvis but originate in other locations are the rectus abdominis, the internal and external obliques. Remember, the external oblique has the triangular shaped opening for the inguinal canal that allows the spermatic cord or the round ligaments to pass through. There's also the psoas muscles. Interesting thing about the extrapelvic muscles is many of them are actually hip muscles or form your rear end. So the ones that are pelvic muscles that help with hip rotation are gluteus maximus, medius, and minimus. You've probably heard of these, which help with that rotation and flexion of the thigh. The gluteus maximus is the largest of these. This makes up the biggest portion of your rear end, and it is the most superficial. The medius and the minimus are much smaller. When we look at them in a diagram, all you have to be able to do is basically pick these out. So here's gluteus maximus, the large diagonal shaped muscles that extend from sacrum over to the backside of femur, if you notice here. So they're really not in that pelvic region. Underneath that, then we have gluteus minimus, which basically runs in an opposite direction. And then we have gluteus medius, which is not underneath gluteus maximus, but it runs from iliac crest down to greater trochanter of the femur. So again, as you can see, these are all on the back side of the pelvis and help with hip rotation. You can pick these out on an MRI, so this should be relatively easy for you. So we're going to look here for bone. And if you look right out here, we're going to see gluteus minimus and medius. And this large, broad muscle that you're seeing across the back here is gluteus maximus. So if we look at those same muscles over here where there isn't a whole bunch of labels, here's gluteus maximus, here's minimus, and this one here is medius. Next, we're going to look at the pelvic wall muscles. These are the muscles that form the interior portion of the pelvic cavity. They do not form the floor, which would be this open space that we're going to see here. Those will be the next set. So these are going to be essentially inside that pelvic girdle. The three major muscles we're going to look at here are the piriformis, which are the blue muscles, the obturator internus and externus, which are essentially your yellow muscles, and the iliacus muscles, which are the green. If you've heard of the iliacus muscles, those will join with our psoas muscles, known as the iliopsoas muscle. So starting with the piriformis, this acts to rotate our thigh laterally. It does originate on the ilium and the sacrum, and it runs through the sciatic notch and inserts on the greater trochanter. So it starts on the inside but lands on the outside. This is a picture looking from the posterior side of the skeleton. I'm going to go back up to this picture so you can see it originates in here and then extends out here to hip. Essentially, it comes right through this large opening and attaches on the back side there. Obturator internus and externus. These also help rotate the leg laterally or with abduction of the leg. So internus muscle is a fan-shaped muscle that originates on the pubic bone and obturator foramen, which, if you remember, the obturator foramen is the circles down by the ischium and inserts on the greater trochanter. And the externus is a similar fashion, a fan shape, but it originates also on the obturator foramen and also ends on the greater trochanter. So if you look at that picture, essentially what we have with internal and external obturator muscles is they originate on the obturator foramen, which is what their name is. So one's on the inside, one's on the outside, and they both are like a band that comes and forms on the back side of the greater trochanter. So essentially they close off that circle. There's a muscle on both sides of that circle of the spine of the bone, and they're called the internal and external, depending on if they're on the inside or the outside. So I'm going to show you the obturators just in a cross section so you can see them. We have the internal and we have the external. Both of them originate basically around that foramen, which would be this opening that we're seeing here. This would be the bony pelvis. And then they're going to come out and they're going to attach out here on the hip bone, which will be part of this area right here as well. And then I mentioned the iliacus muscle. This is a triangular shaped muscle. It spans the entire iliac fossa, covering the wing here of the pelvic girdle. It originates on the iliac crest and the sacrum, and it joins with the psoas muscle to form the iliopsoas muscle. This also inserts on the greater trochanter, which is the bump here of the femur. So we have iliacus and then psoas, and together they come and they form one muscle down here. In this location, it's known as the iliopsoas, and it inserts on the back side of the femur. The iliopsoas is a very important muscle that allows us to walk. If we look at this in a cross section, we can see the psoas muscle. Remember, it can be confused as a kidney, and we have iliacus muscle. If we're seeing iliac crest, there's still going to be two separate muscles. If we do not see any pelvic girdle anymore, then we're probably going to change names and call it the iliopsoas, because that means we'll be down far enough that it becomes one muscle. The next set are going to be the pelvic diaphragm muscles, or the pelvic floor muscles. They're the same thing. They are funnel shaped and composed of layers of muscle and fascia that form a majority of the pelvis. We basically divide these down into two muscle groups known as the Levator Ani and the Coccygeus muscles. The Levator Ani muscle is the largest muscles of the pelvic floor. It is the most important muscle. It helps support our bladder and keep it from prolapsing. It originates at the symphysis pubis and the ischial spine. It forms wing-like arches that attach to the coccyx, and it is subdivided into three different bands of muscles. We oftentimes just call these the Levator Ani muscles, but there's basically three stripes: the pubococcygeus, the puborectalis, and the iliococcygeus. The names sort of help you figure out where they are going to go. I'm going to jump down here just for a picture so I can show you. So right here we have puborectalis, so from pubic bone around to rectum. We have pubococcygeus, so pubic bone down to coccyx is down in this location. And then the iliococcygeus from ilium down to coccyx. So these three fan-like muscles all form the Levator Ani muscles. I also mentioned the Coccygeus muscles. These are two muscles that form the posterior portion of the pelvic floor. They arise from the ischial spine and fan out and attach to the lower sacrum and the coccyx. Those sets of muscles provide support for our pelvic contents. So if I come over here, here's our coccygeus muscles right in this location. We get this fan of muscles that we're seeing across there. If we look at them on a MRI, we get our coccygeus muscle right here. It's just going to be a small band of muscle. Notice we're seeing gluteus maximus. We're not seeing any of our other pelvic floor muscles. We actually have to go pretty low in the pelvis to see those. So this muscle space, we're really low. We can see greater trochanter and ischium, or the bottom part of that ischium. If you look here, we got urethra and vagina and anus, so we're quite low. And here we can see part of those Levator Ani muscles forming right around that rectum space.